The river took the first pup at dusk, and Senna did not scream. She heard the crack before she saw it, a sound like a bone splitting clean, the ice giving way beneath 7 small bodies that had wandered out in the grey February light. Drawn by something only pups could hear in the whisper beneath frozen water, Senna was already at the riverbank when the second and third broke through, already pulling her coat from her shoulders, already doing the calculation that the rest of the northern pack would later call reckless, and that she would later call the only possible arithmetic. 7 pups in water at this temperature had 4 minutes. She had been standing at the edge of the territory, where she was permitted to stand and no further, because she was Omega and the border was her ceiling, her floor, her walls. She had been standing there, because standing at the edge of things was what she had done her entire life. She went in anyway. The cold hit her like a verdict. Not like cold water in summer, not like the shock of a bracing stream. This was the Voss River in February, which meant it was something else entirely, something with intent, something that understood the body and moved against it with precision. Her lungs locked. Her hands, the moment they submerged, became something she had to command consciously, like tools she was renting from a stranger. She found the first pup by touch in the murk under the broken ice shelf, a small, dense weight of fur and terrified muscle, and she pressed her back against the ice edge and got the animal above the surface and moving toward the bank before she let herself take a breath. 6 more. That was the only thought she permitted herself. 6 more, and then whatever the cold wanted to do with her, it could. She was 29 years old. She had been Omega of the Northern Pack for 11 years, since the night Caius Vane had stood before the gathered circle and declared her rank in front of everyone she had ever loved. She had 3 scars along her left shoulder blade from a territorial dispute she had been ordered to walk into first, as scouts of her rank were ordered to do, as flesh barometers to test the danger before the wolves who mattered were risked. She had a small, crooked finger on her right hand where a bone had broken and been set poorly, because Omegas did not go to the pack healer for crooked fingers, only for wounds that would impair their function. She had learned to read the sky for weather, the earth for tracks, the air for approaching threat, because an Omega's survival depended on being useful before anyone thought to ask. She had never been thanked for any of it. She pulled the second pup out, then the third. The current was working against her now. The broken ice shelf had shifted, and there was a gap she hadn't calculated. And when she went under for the 4th pup, she hit her head on something submerged a rock. A root, the river's own infrastructure, and came up seeing sparks at the edges of her vision. She pressed on. The cold had stopped being cold in the specific way it becomes something else, something the body simply registers as absence, as the slow removal of sensation working inward from the extremities, like a tide going out. 4, 5, 6. The 6th pup was the heaviest, a male, dark-furred, older than the others, and he had stopped fighting by the time she reached him, which was the worst sign. Fighting was good. Fighting meant the body was still arguing with the situation. She turned him in the water, got her forearm beneath his chest, kicked hard for the bank. On the bank, she could see the first 5 she had laid there, small wet shapes shivering violently in the snow, alive and furious about it, in the way that pups are furious when frightened, making sounds like the whole world had betrayed them. The 7th pup was gone. She dove twice more, counting in her head, because she was past the point where her body could be trusted to tell her how long she had been under. She found the 7th against the far bank where the current had pushed him into a tangle of submerged roots, not moving, not fighting, a small gray and white pup with ice already forming at the tips of his ears. She pulled him free. She kicked for the surface. She did not let herself consider the alternative. By the time she climbed out of the river with the 7th pup, Senna's legs were not fully obeying her. She crawled the last few feet up the bank and laid the pup down and pressed both hands against his chest and breathed for him the way the old Omega who had trained her had shown her in a lesson she had never expected to need. And she counted, and she pressed, and she breathed, and the pup's chest moved. Then it moved again, on its own. Then it heaved and he coughed, and the sound he made was the worst and best sound Senna had ever heard in 29 years, the sound of a body deciding, at the last possible moment, to stay. She was on her knees in the snow with ice in her hair and no feeling in her hands when the first of the spectators arrived. She had not noticed them gathering. This was the thing about being Omega that she had understood for years without having a name for you, existed at the periphery of the pack's attention, in a specific way that meant you were watched when you were needed, and invisible when you were not. Now she was needed, or rather, what she had done was needed, and so she became visible again, and they were there. 12 wolves standing at the tree line watching her kneel over the 7th pup in the snow, watching her breathe for him, and not one of them had come to the water's edge. They had watched, and not one voice had called to her, and not one hand had reached in. She understood this. She had always understood this. The understanding had a texture like stone under her sternum, smooth from years of being pressed against, and she knew better than to expect warmth from it. What she had not expected was Caius. She heard him before she saw him, the particular weight of his footsteps in the snow, the cadence she had memorized, the way you memorize a sound that governs your life. He was Alpha King of the Northern Pack, which meant he was the largest, the oldest, the most recognized, the most feared, and the most deferred to creature in this territory. He was 36 years old, and he had been Alpha for 8 years, and he had declared Senna's rank on the night of her 18th birthday, in front of 300 wolves, while she stood in the center of the gathering circle in the white dress the Omega tradition required. He had not looked at her when he said it. He had looked at the sky, as Alpha Kings did, as if the pronouncement were coming from somewhere above them both, and he was merely its channel. She had not forgotten the look on his face. She had tried, but the specific quality of his deliberate non-gaze had lodged somewhere in her memory and refused all eviction. He stood at the edge of the bank now, and Senna was still on her knees, and the 7th pup was breathing steadily beneath her hands, and she could feel Caius looking at her the way you feel a change in air pressure, the way you feel weather arriving. "Omega," he said. She did not look up. "They need warming," she said. "The pups. The one on the end, the smallest female." She stopped shivering, and that's more dangerous than shivering. Someone needs to carry them inside. Someone warm. A pause. "You went into the Voss," he said. "Yes," Senna said. She still had not looked at him. She was watching the 7th pup breathe, and she would continue watching the 7th pup breathe until she was certain the rhythm was self-sustaining, because someone needed to, and she was the one here, and she was the one who had gone into the river, which meant she was also the one responsible for the outcome. "In February," he said. "The ice broke," she said. "They went in. I was closest." What she did not say was that closest was a relative term. She had been standing at the territorial boundary because she was not permitted to stand anywhere else, and the wolves permitted to stand anywhere else had been elsewhere, and so when the ice broke, the nearest warm body to 7 pups in the Voss River in February had been the Omega who lived at the margins. She did not say any of this. She said they need warming. Now, not this conversation. Someone came forward. She heard the snow compress under multiple sets of feet, heard the soft, distressed sounds of the pups being lifted, heard the pack moving back toward the den structures, and then it was quieter, and she was still on her knees, and she was beginning to understand that she was very, very cold and had been for some time, and that the warmth she had been operating on was something other than body heat. It was something she would need to account for, possibly soon. She tried to stand. Her legs declined. She put one hand in the snow and pushed, and the world tilted, and she stayed where she was. Her hands, when she looked at them, were the wrong color. Not white the way cold hands go white, but something deeper, something that required naming and attention. "You're hypothermic," Caius said. She had forgotten he was still there. "I'm aware," she said, and tried again to stand, and achieved it this time, though the achievement was imprecise, the world swaying in a way it did not generally sway. She stood with her arms away from her body, because bringing them in felt impossible, and she looked at Caius Vane for the first time, directly, without the sideways glance that Omega rank required. And she looked at him, because she was too cold to remember to be careful. He was looking back at her with an expression she had never seen on him. She had seen him angry. She had seen him conduct the pack tribunal that had cost Rin 3 fingers for the theft of territory markers. She had seen him in the territorial battles that marked the spring. She had seen him cold with contempt at pack gatherings when someone spoke out of order. She had seen him still and deliberate, and she had seen him fierce. She had not seen this. Whatever this was, it had no precedent in her 11 years of studying the geometry of his expressions from the safe outer distance of Omega rank. Come inside, he said. To the Omega quarters, she said, because she was very cold, and also because she had learned to name her cage out loud when people pretended it didn't exist, which was a small maintenance of sanity she had developed over years. To the warming room, he said. She looked at him. The warming room was where the pack healer worked, where injured wolves were brought, where rank was irrelevant because damage was the only category. The warming room was not a place she was supposed to go for a crooked finger or a bruise sustained in one of the territorial border walks she was sent on first. I can walk to the Omega quarters, she said, which was technically true in the sense that she was vertical. You cannot, he said, and he was not wrong, and she hated him for being not wrong, and she hated the cold for taking away the margin she usually maintained, and she hated herself a little for the specific sensation that moved through her chest when he stepped forward and put his hands on her arms in a steadying grip, because that sensation was warmth in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and she had spent 11 years making sure she did not allow herself to feel warmth where Caius Vane was concerned. She let him walk her inside because she had no remaining argument. The warming room smelled of pine resin and the medicinal herb the pack healer kept in bundles from the ceiling, and it was the warmest room in the den complex, kept that way specifically for recovery. The healer, an older female wolf named Bren, who had been doing this work for 30 years, and who treated Senna's Omega rank with the same brisk irrelevance she brought to all ranks when bodies were damaged, came forward immediately and began assessing without ceremony. Hands, Bren said, and looked at them, and made a sound in her throat. How long in the water? I didn't count, Senna said. She pulled 7 pups, Caius said from the doorway. I have eyes, Alpha King, Bren said without looking up. There's river water on her boots, and there are 7 pups alive in the eastern chamber. I can add. How long, Senna? Long enough for the 7th, Senna said. Bren's hands, assessing the color and texture of Senna's, were careful and efficient, and carried none of the apology that the warmth in them suggested. You'll keep the fingers, she said. Sit down before you fall down. The blankets are on the hook. Senna sat. The warmth, when it came back into her, came back the way it always came back after the Voss, not all at once, but in stages, each stage more painful than the cold itself, the nerves reasserting their right to feel, and doing so without particular gentleness. She pressed her back into the corner of the bench, pulled the thick wool over her shoulders, and did not make a sound, because she had stopped making sounds about pain some time ago. The habit having been trained out of her by years of understanding that Omega distress was not a priority. Caius remained in the doorway for longer than he needed to. She was aware of him the way she was always aware of him, the way you are aware of something large in a room, not with attention. Exactly. But with the body's constant peripheral registering of where the significant mass is, he looked like he was going to say something. He looked like he had been going to say something for 11 years and kept deciding against it. The 7th pup, she said, because she needed something to say that was not about him, or about the expression on his face, or about the way the cold had stripped her of 11 years of careful, performed indifference. Is he stable? Yes, Caius said. Good, she said. Senna. She looked at him directly again. She seemed to have lost the habit of looking away, or perhaps that too was the cold's casualty. 11 years ago, he said, and stopped. Don't, she said. He stopped. Bren, he said, shifting register. She has everything she needs. She has everything she needs because I am good at my work, Bren said from across the room, and you are in my doorway, Alpha King. He left. Senna closed her eyes in the warmth and let herself, just for the length of 3 breaths, feel the thing she refused to name. Then she returned it to the locked place she kept such things, and opened her eyes and accepted the heated broth Bren pressed into her hands without ceremony, and drank it, and planned to be well by morning. She was not well by morning. What she was by morning was the subject of every conversation in the den complex, because by morning the pack knew what she had done. And knowing, and the thing they did with knowing, which was not the same as gratitude, were 2 different processes that produced 2 different kinds of heat. She could hear it from the Omega quarters, where she lay under her own blankets instead of Bren's, the specific modulation of the pack's collective voice that meant she was the topic. It had a recognizable frequency. She had heard it before, always in registers that meant she had done something wrong, something outside the permitted arc of Omega behavior, something that required the pack's corrective attention. This time the frequency was different. She couldn't parse it. She lay on her side and listened to the muffled conversation moving through the walls, and tried to read it the way she read weather and tracks an approaching threat, and found she couldn't. And found that the inability frightened her more than the familiar version would have. Petra came at mid-morning. Petra was beta female of the pack and one of 2 wolves in the northern pack, who had spoken to Senna with genuine regularity over 11 years, the other being Bren, who spoke to everyone with equal brisk investment regardless of rank. Petra was different. Petra had sought her out deliberately, had appeared at the Omega quarters 7 years ago with the specific energy of someone who had decided to do something and was doing it, and had sat down and asked Senna about the border walk she had completed the previous week, with a quality of genuine curiosity that Senna had not encountered in so long she had briefly mistaken it for mocking. Petra came in now without knocking, which was her custom and Senna's private pleasure, the refusal to treat the Omega quarters as a place that required the deference of knocking. "You look terrible," Petra said. "I'm warm," Senna said. "Your hands are bruised from the ice." "They work." Petra sat on the end of the bed with the particular weight of someone carrying news they haven't decided how to deliver. Senna watched her settle and waited, because Petra's silences always resolved on their own if given enough space. "He's called a gathering," Petra said. Senna was quiet for a moment. "When?" "Tonight. Full circle. All ranks." Full circle gatherings were rare. They were called for 3 categories of event: territorial crisis, rank ceremony, and judgment. She ran through the categories and found none of them fit the shape of yesterday, which meant either she was wrong about the categories or this was a 4th thing. "He hasn't called a full gathering for 4 years, Senna said. "No," Petra said. "He hasn't." "The pups," Senna said. "Is it about the pups? Were any of them?" She stopped, but couldn't complete the question. The 7th pup, the one she had found against the roots. "All 7 are well," Petra said firmly, eating and complaining about the eating, which is apparently a sign of excellent recovery. She paused. "They belong to 7 different families, Senna, different rank lines. The smallest female is a beta daughter. The big dark male is the gamma line's eldest. The 7th, the gray and white one." She stopped. Senna waited. "He's the Alpha King's nephew," Petra said. The room was very quiet for a moment. Senna understood several things simultaneously, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives in clusters rather than sequence, why Caius had been at the riverbank so quickly, why his expression had carried that unprecedented quality, why he had stayed in Bren's doorway long past the point of practical purpose, and why he had said 11 years ago and then stopped. She understood these things with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the river. "He should have gone in himself," she said. Petra looked at her steadily. "He wasn't there." "Then someone should have been there," Senna said. "The pack's children are in pack territory by the river in February, and the Omega is the one standing at the boundary edge, because she is only permitted to stand at the boundary edge. And 7 pups go into the Voss, and the nearest warm body is—" She stopped herself, breathed. "No one came in after them. I was in that water, and not one wolf came in." "I know," Petra said. "They watched," Senna said. 12 wolves, not one." "I know," Petra said again, in the same voice, the voice that did not argue because it could not argue, because what Senna was saying was simply true, and Petra had the quality of someone who respected truth even when it was uncomfortable. "Why a gathering?" Senna said. "I don't know," Petra said, which was the first time in their 7 years that Senna had heard Petra say those words and not been certain they were true. The gathering circle was cut into the earth at the center of the den complex, ringed by stones that had been placed by the founding generation and added to by each alpha in succession, each stone engraved with a name or a mark. The fire at the center was lit at dusk, as it always was for full gatherings, and the pack arranged itself in the traditional order ranks by proximity to the fire, Alpha King at the inner edge, then the Beta and Gamma circles, then the wider rings of lesser ranks, and at the furthest edge, where the stone ring ended and the dark began, the Omega stood. Or, in this case, the Omega stood. singular, because the northern pack had only one. Senna stood at her place at the edge of the stone circle and watched the fire and felt 300 wolves behind her, around her, within her sight and peripheral vision, and felt the usual loneliness that the gathering circle produced in her, which was a peculiar loneliness, the loneliness of being present among many, surrounded and isolated simultaneously, the way a stone dropped into a pool is surrounded by water and nevertheless achieves only depth, never warmth. She was wearing the omega white, which she was required to wear at gatherings, which she had always worn, which she had decided 11 years ago she would wear with exactly as much dignity as she could manage. Because dignity was the one thing they could not assign a rank to, and so she had never let them have it. Caius stood at the fire's inner edge and the flames moved in the wind and threw light at angles across the gathered pack, and Senna watched him from the outer darkness and knew he was going to do something she hadn't predicted, because all evening the texture of the air had had that quality, that pre-weather sense of pressure about to change. He spoke the opening words of the full gathering in the traditional form, the ancient phrases that began every circle. His voice was built for this deep and unhurried, the voice of someone for whom authority is not performed but simply present, like the density of a stone. Senna had spent 11 years maintaining careful distance from the particular effect of that voice on her nervous system, and she maintained it now through the cold discipline of practice. Then he said, "I am calling this gathering to speak of Omega Senna." The wind moved through the pines beyond the circle. 300 wolves were very quiet. "Yesterday at dusk," he said, 7 of our pack's pups fell through the ice of the Voss River. The ice was thin in the places they walked, which is a failure of our territorial monitoring, which is my failure to account for. 7 pups went into the river. The adult wolves nearest were 12 in number. Not one of them entered the water. He paused. The quiet had a texture now, a specific, uncomfortable quality. The silence of a gathering that does not know whether it is about to witness an honor or a judgment, and is in the process of understanding it may have been wrong about which is which. The Omega entered the water, Caius said. Alone. She recovered all 7 pups. The 7th pup had ceased breathing. She revived him. The silence continued. "The 7th pup is my brother's son," Caius said. "His name is Fen. He is 8 years old, and he is alive because of the Omega who stood at the territorial boundary where her rank confines her and went into the Voss River in February alone because no one else did." He turned, and he was looking at her, across the fire and the inner circles and the 300 wolves, looking directly at her, and she held his gaze with the new reckless directness that the cold had opened up in her and had not yet closed. "I want to speak about what rank means," he said, still looking at her, "and what it costs, and what we have done with it." Something shifted in the circle, not sound, but movement, the subtle realignment of 300 bodies in the presence of something they had not expected. Senna felt it the way you feel weather. She kept her face still. 11 years ago, he said, I stood in this circle, and I declared Senna's rank. I said the words the tradition required. I looked at the sky. He paused. "I have looked at the sky many times since. I have not looked at her. Not correctly. Not as the alpha king of this pack looks at a wolf who has served it. I have looked at the rank and assumed the rank described the wolf. And what I learned yesterday is that I had this exactly backward." Senna's hands were bruised, and the bruises ached in the cold, and she pressed her fingernails into the ache, because it was the only thing keeping her in this moment, rather than somewhere outside of it. Somewhere where she could survive the experience of being seen by 300 wolves at once after 11 years of careful invisibility. "I am not asking her forgiveness," Caius said. "That is not what this gathering is." She had not expected him to say that. She had been preparing in the cold periphery of her attention for an apology for the public, apology that would require a public acceptance, the performance of reconciliation she would be expected to produce, the forgiveness she would be pressured into giving before the gathered pack, because refusal would be its own kind of rank violation. She had been preparing to refuse it. She had been choosing, already, the words of the refusal. "I am calling this gathering," he said, "to change something, not to fix what was done to her, What was done to her cannot be undone. 11 years cannot be returned. Her crooked finger will not straighten. The scars on her shoulder will not smooth. The cold she carried out of the Voss will not be unfelt. He was still looking at her. I am calling this gathering to make the pack witness to a truth that we have all been complicit in ignoring, and then to act on it. He left the fire's inner edge. He walked through the beta circle and the gamma circle and the wider rings, and the pack parted before him, the way they always parted before him, and he walked to the outer edge of the gathering circle, to the dark beyond the stones, and he stopped in front of her, and the firelight reached this far, only imperfectly, reaching her in shades and suggestions. He went to one knee in the snow. The sound that moved through 300 wolves was not quite sound. It was the breath equivalent of sound, the collective moment of inhalation that precedes acknowledgement. Senna looked down at him. Alpha, king of the northern pack, brother's son, alive because of her. Looking up at her in the firelight, with that expression she still did not have a name for, but which she was beginning to understand was grief, specific and particular. The grief of someone who has understood something too late and is in the process of reckoning with the lateness. You are not forgiven for this, she said. Her voice was even. She had worked for 11 years at even, and it held. That is not what I have to give you. I know, he said. What was done to me here was not done only by you, she said. You were the instrument of it, but the pack was the body, and the 12 who watched from the tree line were the proof, and 11 years of silence was the evidence. One gathering does not remedy that. One gesture does not remedy that. I know, he said again. Then why are you on your knee? She said. Not cruelty, genuine inquiry. Because I need to begin somewhere, he said. And I need you to see it, and I need the pack to see it. And because beginning in front of witnesses is the only way to bind myself to the continuing. The wind moved through the pines. The fire behind him threw his shadow long across the snow toward the tree line. Senna looked at him for a long time, long enough that the silence took on its own quality, long enough that the watching pack began to feel the weight of it, which was intentional. Because she had waited 11 years, and she was not going to abbreviate this moment for anyone's comfort. Stand up, she said finally. He stood. You are not forgiven, she said, but I am listening, and what I listen to will determine what comes next. Not your gesture, not this gathering, not the tradition of what happens after an alpha king kneels. She looked past him at the gathered pack. At the beta circle and the gamma circle and the 12 wolves whose faces she had memorized at the tree line yesterday. This is mine now. The determining is mine. You called this gathering and you gave me that at least, and I am taking it. She stepped past him into the firelight. The pack had never seen an Omega walk to the fire's inner ring. The tradition, 11 years of tradition, of rank structure and order, and the concentric circles that preserve the Alpha's center, had never included this. Senna walked to the fire and stood at its edge and felt the heat on her face, on her bruised hands, on the scars beneath her white dress. And she looked at 300 wolves from the place she was not supposed to stand and found that the ground was the same ground everywhere, that the stone ring held her weight the same as anyone's, that the fire was no more or less fire for her being near it. She spoke. She spoke about the border walks, the 3 scars, the crooked finger, the 11 years of standing at the territorial edge with the cold at her back. She spoke about the river and the ice and the specific quality of the Voss in February, the way it takes the body's heat, not quickly, but deliberately, piece by piece, like an argument rather than an attack. She spoke about the 7th pup in the roots below the water, not moving, not fighting, and what she had felt when she pulled him free, and what she had felt when he breathed, and what she had felt climbing the bank on legs that no longer fully obeyed her while 12 wolves watched from the tree line. She spoke about these things without apology, and without performance, and without the careful peripheral positioning she had learned to survive in, and the pack listened with the quality of people hearing a story they have been the setting of without knowing they were in it. When she finished, the fire crackled. Wind moved. 300 wolves were present and still. I am not leaving, she said. I want to be clear about that. I am not leaving this pack. This is my territory as much as it is any of yours. My scent is in the borders. My blood is in the boundary disputes. My air is in the Voss. I am not going anywhere." She paused. "But I am also not the Omega anymore. Not the Omega as this pack has understood and used the word. If there is a rank for a wolf who has earned the right to stand where she needs to stand, I will hold that rank. If there is not, then the pack should make one, because it has needed one for some time." Caius, standing at the outer edge where she had left him, said, "There is a rank." She looked at him. "It is the rank of the one who acted when acting was required," he said. "In the old traditions, in the founding traditions, before the ranking structure calcified, it was called warden. Not of territory, of life. The wolf who stood between the pack's children and the thing that threatened them." "Is that a rank you can give?" she said. "No," he said. "It is a rank the pack gives." He turned to the gathered circle. He waited. Petra stepped forward from the beta ring, into the firelight, and said, "I give it." Then the beta circle moved, not all of them, but enough to be unmistakable, stepping into the light, stepping across the concentric tradition that had held them in place for a generation. Then the gammas, then the wider rings. Not unanimously, she did not need it to be unanimous, did not need the 12 by the tree line, did not need the perfect consensus of the pack performing its approval. She needed only what was real, and what was real moved through the gathering circle in the cold February night, like water through a break in ice, unstoppable once it found its direction, reshaping everything it touched. She stood at the fire and let it happen, and she did not perform gratitude, and she did not cry, and she did not forgive the 11 years. And she did not look at Caius with anything other than the steady, even gaze of someone who has determined the terms of what comes next and is holding those terms with both bruised hands. Later, after the gathering had dispersed, after the fire burned low, after Petra had walked with her back toward the den complex, with the specific, comfortable silence of 7 years of genuine friendship, after Bren had checked her hands again with the same brisk efficiency and declared the bruising would resolve, Senna sat in the warming room that she was now permitted to sit in. Because the warming room was for the injured and for the healer, and for the Alpha King, and now it was for the warden too, which was a word that fit in her mouth the way she had always suspected her real name did and had never been given. Caius came to the doorway. He stood there in the way he had stood in Bren's doorway the previous evening, with that particular quality of a man who is outside a threshold and is uncertain whether the right to cross it has been revoked or has never been granted. "The pups want to see you," he said. "All 7. Their families asked if you would come." "Tomorrow," she said, "when my hands are less dramatic." A pause. "Your hands are dramatic," she said. "The bruising is dramatic. I'm using the word deliberately. Pups get frightened by dramatic bruising, and I would like to see them in a context where they are not frightened." "That's thoughtful," he said. "It's practical," she said. "I am generally both." He was quiet for a moment. "The warden rank traditionally comes with quarters in the inner complex," he said. "Not the outer boundary." "Not—" "I know where the outer boundary is," she said. "Yes," he said, "I know you do." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire in the small grate between them threw its modest warmth into the room. And outside the den complex, the Voss was moving under what remained of its ice, patient and cold and indifferent to any of this, as rivers are. "Caius," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. In 11 years, she had called him Alpha King or not called him anything, both being forms of the same distance. She used his name now the way you use a key with intention, to open something, not as a gift, but as a necessary action. "Yes," he said. "I said I am listening," she said, "to what comes next. What you do with what you understand, starting from now. That is what I am listening to." She paused. "I am not telling you it leads anywhere in particular. I am not promising you that it leads to anything you want it to lead to, but I am listening, and that is more than the alternative." He was very still. Then he said, "I'll take it." "You don't take it," she said. "It simply is. My listening is not yours to take or be given. It is what I am doing because I choose to do it, and if that changes, I will stop. He absorbed this. Then I will do what I do, he said. And you will listen, and we will find out. Yes, she said. That is exactly it. She turned back to the fire. He remained in the doorway for another moment, and then she heard him move away, his footsteps in the hall, diminishing. The fire cracked. Her hands ached where the ice had bruised them, but it was a clean ache, the ache of things that had taken damage and were in the process of deciding to mend. The seventh pup's name was Fen, and he was 8 years old, and he had gray and white fur and a particular low-set ear that gave him a permanently skeptical expression. And when she visited the following morning, he pressed his nose into her bruised palm and held very still, the way pups do when they are trying to be careful with something they understand to be fragile. And Senna held very still, too, and let herself be known by him, and found that being known by small creatures who have no rank agenda is the warmest thing in the world, warmer than any fire, warmer than the warming room, warmer than the gathered circle's belated recognition. She would hold the border walks of her own design now. She would walk where she judged it necessary, with the pack's children's safety as her only criterion, because that was what a warden did, and she had been doing it by instinct for 11 years without the name. She would have the inner quarters and she would use them, and she would also keep the habit of watching the sky that she had developed at the territorial edge. Because the sky did not change according to rank, and its information was equally available to anyone who had learned to look, which she had. She would listen to what Caius did, as she had said she would, steadily and without mercy, with the same clarity she had brought to reading weather and tracks, and the whisper beneath the ice of the Voss. She would not forgive the 11 years because they did not require her forgiveness to have happened, and their happening was a fact she intended to hold with both hands, permanently, as the source of a knowledge she would never willingly unknow. What she would not do is pretend that the knowing closed the door. She had always been the wolf who stood at the boundary of things, at the edge of the permitted arc, at the margin where the cold lived. She had gone into the river from that position and come back from it changed in the specific way that doing the necessary thing changes you, not softened, not opened to reconciliation, but clarified, stripped to something essential, returned to herself in the way that very cold water returns you to your own body by taking everything else away. She was the warden of the northern pack, and her hands would heal, and the Voss would freeze over again in the nights ahead, and she would walk the boundary she chose, at the hour she chose, watched by no one's permission. The seventh pup exhaled his warm breath into her palm, and the morning light came through the den window at a low winter angle and lay itself across the floor without asking, which was how light worked, which was how she intended to work from here forward, and which was, she decided, enough.